What if I told you that somewhere in America right now, there's a woman in her 40s living a completely normal life? She might be picking up her kids from soccer practice, or grabbing coffee with friends, or sitting in a PTA meeting complaining about school fundraisers. She looks just like any other suburban mom, but she's carrying a secret so dark that if her neighbors knew the truth, they would never look at her the same way again. Her father is Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, and she was born in a prison. This is the story of Rose Bundy, a woman who came into this world under circumstances so bizarre they sound like fiction. A woman who spent her earliest years visiting Daddy in a place where Daddy wore handcuffs and orange jumpsuits. A woman whose childhood drawings said, "I love you, Daddy," and were mailed to death row. But here's the twist that makes this story even more incredible. Rose Bundy doesn't just exist in the shadow of her father's crimes. She escaped from them completely. She vanished so thoroughly that even the most determined true crime investigators can't find her. She became a ghost by choice, and her disappearance might be the most successful vanishing act in criminal history. October 24th, 1982. While most of America was watching the evening news and going about their normal lives, a baby girl was being born in a hospital in Florida. But this wasn't just any birth. This was the arrival of Ted Bundy's daughter, conceived in one of the most secured prisons in the country. Born to a woman who had married a serial killer in a courtroom and honeymooned in a visiting room. Think about that for a moment. While Ted Bundy was sitting on death row for confessing to the murders of dozens of young women, he somehow managed to become a father. The same hands that had taken so many lives had cradled a newborn baby. The same man who had terrorized an entire nation was being called Daddy by an innocent child. Caroline Boone, Rose's mother, had moved across the entire country to support Bundy during his trials. She worked with him, fell in love with him, and absolutely refused to believe he was capable of murder. When she married him in that courtroom in 1980, she wasn't just marrying a man, she was marrying into a nightmare that she couldn't yet see. But here's where the story gets even more surreal. Prison rules strictly forbade conjugal visits for death row inmates. So how exactly did Caroline become pregnant with Ted Bundy's child? The rumors that swirled around this question paint a picture of a system so corrupted by Bundy's charm that even trained guards might have looked the other way. Some whispered about bribed officials and stolen moments in empty rooms. Others suggested more creative methods that would make your skin crawl. Caroline never explained how it happened. When reporters pressed her for details, she would snap back with 4 words that became her motto: "It's nobody's business." But somebody's business or not, Rose Bundy was now a reality, and she was about to grow up in the most twisted version of a normal family that you could possibly imagine. Picture this scene: a toddler in a bright yellow dress, giggling and playing with toys while her father sits across from her in prison uniform. Family photos taken with bars in the background. A little girl who thinks this is what all families look like. That visiting that sterile room with guards watching every move is just what you do when you want to see Daddy. For the first few years of her life, Rose had no idea that her situation was unusual. To her, Daddy lived in a big building with lots of other people, and you had to go through several doors and talk to serious-looking adults before you could see him. She drew him pictures with crayons, the way all children draw pictures for their fathers, except her pictures were mailed to death row. Caroline tried desperately to create some version of normalcy. She and Rose lived in Gainesville, not far from the prison, and she brought her daughter for regular visits. In Rose's world, this was just how families worked. You visited Daddy in a room where he couldn't pick you up and carry you around, where you couldn't go outside and play together, where every hug was watched by strangers. Those who knew Caroline during this period described her as a devoted mother doing her absolute best under impossible circumstances. She was raising a child whose last name had become synonymous with evil, trying to shield that child from a truth that was growing harder to hide with each passing day. Because while Rose was learning to walk and talk and sing nursery rhymes, America was becoming obsessed with her father. Ted Bundy's trials weren't just legal proceedings, they were entertainment. Cameras captured every moment, and disturbingly, Bundy had developed a fan base. Young women would show up to court sessions, fascinated by his dark charisma. There were letters, admirers, people who found his intelligence and manipulation skills attractive rather than terrifying. This was the world Rose was born into, a world where her father was simultaneously the most hated man in America and a twisted kind of celebrity. While other children's fathers were going to work and coaching Little League, Rose's father was granting interviews about murder techniques and legal strategies. But Caroline held on to hope. She continued to believe that somehow, some way, Ted Bundy would prove his innocence and come home to them. She built her entire life around this fantasy, creating a bubble where they were just a family separated by unfortunate circumstances rather than a woman and child connected to a monster. That bubble burst in 1986 when Rose was 4 years old, in the most heartbreaking way possible. The phone call came from prison, as they always did. But this time, Ted Bundy said something that changed everything forever. As his execution date approached and his appeals ran out, desperation took hold. In that conversation, Bundy asked Caroline a question that destroyed her world in a single sentence. He asked if she thought he should start telling authorities where the bodies were. Think about what that question meant. It wasn't just an admission of guilt. It was Bundy's way of revealing that everything Caroline had believed, everything she had built her life around, everything she had told their daughter, was a lie. He hadn't just confessed to the murders. He was asking her permission to use the locations of his victims' remains as bargaining chips to delay his execution. In that moment, Caroline Ann Boone's fairy tale collapsed into nightmare. The man she had loved, married, and defended wasn't just guilty. He was exactly the monster everyone said he was. And she had spent years bringing her innocent daughter to visit him in prison. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Caroline did something remarkable. She made a decision that probably saved her daughter's life. She hung up the phone and never spoke to Ted Bundy again. Bundy reportedly begged for one last conversation with Rose, one final chance to say goodbye to his daughter. Caroline refused. There would be no tearful farewell, no final fatherly words of wisdom, no closure. Just silence. Within days, Caroline had packed up everything they owned, taken Rose and her half-brother James, and disappeared from Florida forever. She divorced Bundy while he sat in his cell, and by the time he was executed in January 1989, Caroline and Rose were long gone, living under new identities in a place where the name Bundy couldn't follow them. Rose was 6 years old when her father died in the electric chair, old enough to remember him, but young enough for her mother to help her forget. And that's exactly what Caroline set out to do. They moved to Washington State, back to the Pacific Northwest, where Caroline had family. They changed their names, erased their past, and began the long process of becoming completely different people. Rose started school under a new identity, made friends who had no idea who her father was, and for the first time in her life, experienced what it felt like to be normal. For over 30 years, this strategy has worked perfectly. Rose Bundy became a ghost. Not the kind of ghost that haunts people, but the kind that simply ceases to exist in any public way. She grew up, graduated high school, maybe went to college, maybe got married, maybe had children of her own. Ted Bundy could have grandchildren somewhere in America right now. But if he does, nobody knows about it. Caroline kept her promise to protect her daughter until the day she died. In 2018, she passed away in Washington at the age of 70, having spent over 30 years successfully hiding one of the most sought-after secrets in true crime history. Even on her deathbed, she never revealed where Rose was or what name she was using. True crime enthusiasts have spent decades trying to find Rose Bundy. They've chased rumors, investigated name changes, followed false leads across the country. Some think she became Abigail Griffin. Others believe she moved to another country entirely. But every lead ends in silence. Every investigation hits a wall. Because the people who know where Rose is have decided that her privacy matters more than public curiosity. Even Anne Rule, the famous true crime writer who knew Ted Bundy personally, refused to investigate Rose's whereabouts. She wrote that Bundy's daughter had been through enough pain and deserved to live her life in peace. When one of the world's most famous investigators decides that some secrets should stay secret, that tells you everything you need to know about how fiercely Rose's privacy has been protected. Today, Rose Bundy would be around 42 years old. She's living somewhere in America, or maybe somewhere else in the world, under a name that has nothing to do with serial killers or death row or prison visits. She might be a teacher, a nurse, a lawyer, a stay-at-home mom. She might volunteer at her kids' school, host book clubs, complain about traffic on social media. The most remarkable thing about Rose Bundy's story isn't that she was born to a monster. It's that she escaped from that legacy completely. She proved that you don't have to be defined by the worst thing your parent ever did. She showed that it's possible to disappear from a story you never wanted to be part of in the first place. And maybe that's the most beautiful ending this story could have. Not a dramatic revelation or a tell-all interview or a book deal. Just silence. Just a woman living a quiet life, far from the darkness she was born into, surrounded by people who know her for who she chose to become rather than who her father was. Rose Bundy won. She beat the odds, escaped the legacy, and became invisible in the best possible way. And the fact that we'll probably never know anything more about her story? That's not a mystery to be solved. That's a victory to be celebrated.